It all depends on where you're looking at it from. You can look at it from up looking down, or you can look at it from down looking up. As to who you think you are. When you look at it from down looking up, you continuously underestimate yourself. And when you look at it only from up looking down, you often forget who you also are. From down looking up, here we are, a group of reasonably rational human beings deeply immersed in the reality that's available to us through our senses, through our eyes, ears, nose, mouth, skin. And what we can think about. And then something happens to you or a friend of yours or somebody you've heard about or in a book you've read, or somebody or other, sometime or other, and you attempt to look at it from down here, that is, to explain it to yourself in a way that will make you comfortable. So you have an experience, and the first label you apply is, well, that was an experience. And then you say, well, that wasn't an experience like other experiences. So you can say, well, that was a dream. And then you feel secure, like you know what it is because you just labeled it. Or you say, well, that was a hallucination. Or you say, I think I'm going insane. Which means that where you're thinking and where you're thinking from is sanity, and where you just went is not there, so it must be insane, not sane. Or you are sitting and suddenly a bolt of energy shoots through your body, perhaps up your spine. And your brain explodes, and your whole life flashes before you. And you experience the unity of all things. You experience it all at once. And you say, well, that is a very interesting neurophysiological development. What has clearly happened is that there has been some short-circuiting that has led to the firing of a number of neurons in my brain simultaneously, which has given me the illusion that I am experiencing all of the universe all at once. Or you pick up a book like, in the West, the book, the Bible, And it says, Christ touched his eyes, put mud on his eyes and touched it, and the man was healed. The man was lame and he was healed. And from down looking up, you say, well, that was probably written by somebody who wanted to strengthen faith in people, and it probably is merely a metaphor. Probably didn't really happen. I mean, how do we know? Because everything that's written in books isn't true. We seem to go out of our way when we are down looking up to protect the security of the world that our minds and senses allows us to know by trying as best we can to explain everything within that context. The story that always comes to mind when I'm thinking about that particular perceptual viewpoint is the story of the blind man the drunk looking for the watch under the street lamp. And other people help him look for the watch. And finally they say, well, where exactly did you lose the watch? And he says, well, I lost it up the alley. So, well, why are you looking here? And he says, because there's a light here. It's the same predicament that when we are down looking up, we tend to want to look only within the realms that our senses and minds light up, and everything else we treat as irrelevant. We have in science a waste paper category. We can call it error of measurement. We're social scientists. We can call it lying. We can call it a number of things in order to protect our model of reality. I've just looked through some books by Gopi Krishna, who was an Indian man who had the experience of Kundalini, and he was a very good man. But immediately upon having them, he attempted to bring them back by explaining them within scientific terminology. And that's a very reasonable thing to do. You're saying, look, I was born onto this plane of existence. I've had this experience, or I know of this experience. Let me bring it down here so it will make the field richer here, so it will make life better for everybody around me. The only question about that is timing. Because sometimes you tend to try to bring things home too soon because you're afraid of wandering too far from home. And it's a very reasonable fear. You remember the astronauts that were going into, you go up into various planes where the gravitational field gets very thin. And if you jumped out of the rocket at that point, you drop to the Earth. But then you get out beyond that point, and you recall they did spacewalks and they went out on a rope, and there wasn't anything pulling them back to Earth. And if you recall, one of the fellows didn't want to come back into the rocket ship. Okay. And he was considered a weakness of will, of consciousness, because he said, wow. I mean, like, wow. Yeah. Well, I'm free. Ooh. And if he was left alone, he would have just started to float for eternity and probably would have left his body. Recently, a fellow in Wisconsin or Minnesota was practicing yoga and went into samadhi, left his body, and after 5 days, somebody found him, and they found the body, and they didn't find a heartbeat or a pulse, and they decided he was dead, so they buried him. Poor fellow. Now he's got to find another body. Because he was exploring away from home, and he didn't leave a good enough support system behind him for people to take care of his Earth capsule. And the Earth capsule got into the hands of people who didn't understand that he was just away, traveling. Okay. Sounds pretty weird, doesn't it? Weird, really weird, strange stuff. Sounds weird, doesn't it? We're in a very peculiar predicament, many of us. Okay. Because we figured out we aren't who we thought we were. And we not only have figured that out, but we've even figured out how to become who we might be. And some of us have decided to go. Let go of the rope. Maybe you get home and maybe you don't. Wow, right. Okay. Now, a lot of us tried one way or another to leap into that. It's called getting high. I remember, relevant to leaping, I'm not supposed to tell these kind of stories. They're bad for my image. But I once went to the opening of Lincoln Center, and I was high on LSD. That was years ago. And Nureyev was dancing with Margot Fontaine. I had gone to see them once before, also high on LSD, and I had sat in the orchestra. And when I went that time, Nureyev looked like just pure form. You know, there wasn't any human in there. It was just the perfection of form. But this time I was sitting in the dress circle, which looked down on the stage. And in my drug-dazed state, what I saw were this species on the stage that couldn't quite fly. And it kept jumping up and falling down, and jumping up and falling down, right? That roughly has been the predicament of those of us that thought we would get out there into the realms of possibility of who we might be by taking a running leap. Take enough of this or that, hold your breath long enough, fast long enough, a running leap. Perfect sex enough, there'll be a way. We are Westerners and we're achievers, so it was going to be another achievement, right? I mean, there must be a way for us to grab at it and do it. But the parable of the wedding guest at the feast seemed to apply. We kept getting into the wedding feast, but we were never wearing the wedding garment, and we kept getting thrown out into outer darkness. That's here. Watch it. Utopianists, be on your guard. No, I got to play it very gentle. Very mixed audience. God is everywhere. And after a number of years of using every technique, we used things like biofeedback, trying to control our alpha waves. I mean, we've really done a lot of stuff. Some of us drilled holes in our brains. A fellow in Sweden did that. He actually drilled a hole, and he gave a whole paper about how to do it and where to put the hole. Right? Because if we were other than we thought we were, we had to get out there somehow, because whatever it was, it seemed to imply a potential far greater than the one we were realizing now. But the law that what went up seemed to come down continued to apply. And for those of us that got very tuned to other systems of people who had been playing this game before us, there was something very disquieting in their literature and instructions, because it seemed to suggest that it wasn't anything you could do, it was something you had to become. And to become it, you had to finish being who it is you were. Which means that you had to undergo a transformation in the nature, in the very essence of your being. Most of us had very gross, some of us more subtle, clingings to our identity here as social, psychological, social entities on this plane. And we thought, couldn't we have both of them? Couldn't we be who we always were and also be more than we always were, or other than we always were? Because we still wanted to have a few little things around here, like our personalities and our bodies, let alone our hi-fi sets in our car and our... And the rule seemed to be, if you gave it all up, you got it all. So we tried to make believe, and we said, okay, I've given it all up, now give it to me all. See? But we were actually keeping our stash of attachment. See? I've given it up now. See? But the law seemed to be unbending. You had to really risk it all. And it wasn't so easy as just packing your bag and getting your shots and going to India. That didn't do it. See, that was another Western achieving thing. I'll do it. I'll go to India and I'll get enlightened. But there are as many neurotic Westerners in India as there are in the United States. Ashrams are full of them, figuring they've gone through the initiation rite to the fraternity and they have a right to be enlightened. But there's still ego. Lurking in this literature were words like surrender. That's a very creepy word for Westerners. Surrender always gives you an image of Japan with General MacArthur, or General Patton, or something where might has ruled, and there is a table in the middle of a battlefield, and there are the beaten ones and the victorious ones. And somebody comes up to you and says, in order for you to go to the higher consciousness, you must surrender. Okay? Doesn't feel too good. But all of our ingenuity, and we have used ingenuity, to try to bring it home, bring the bacon home, or the soybeans, as the case may be, didn't quite work because nobody wanted to go there to get it. Everybody just wanted to bring it home. So suddenly there were all these big training programs in the West about how to absorb all of the wisdom from other cultures and become it home. You never had to leave home. You just paid for the course. Okay. The problem was the teachers hadn't left home either. Somebody in the system has to have left home. Somebody has to be a Ramakrishna, a Ramana Maharshi, a Buddha, a Hazrat Inayat Khan. A Rabbi Ben David. Somebody has to be somebody that risked it all, a Rumi. It always reminds me of kids that are playing in a dark night near the edge of the woods. And they don't quite have the courage to go into the woods, but they run right up close to the woods and then rush back to the light. And then the other one says, well, I'm going now. And they rush up to the woods, and they just get a foot in, and then they freak, and they run back. See? I mean, you take any student, and you sit them down and start them meditating, and you keep working with them, and they are ready, and they get to the point where their breath starts to stop, and their body starts to get stiff, and their consciousness starts to leave their body, and they get frightened, and they want to run back to the light. Or you take somebody that is used to functioning with the kind of energies that most of us function with every day, and you start to feed in through a meditative experience, or through a devotional experience, or through a hatha yoga experience, or through the presence of a spiritual being experience. Start to pour in 10,000 times that energy. And the person starts to shake, and we call it sometimes Shakti. And if you've watched such a being, sometimes I've watched some teachers, spiritual teachers, who can arouse that Shakti. I've described one scene, I remember in Melbourne, Australia, in a living room, in a nice little house in Melbourne, where this spiritual teacher who could arouse Shakti was sitting playing his ektara, his instrument, musical instrument, with his eyes closed, and all around the room people were starting to show the effects of this incredible energy pouring through their bodies. And one professor in tweeds with a pipe stuck in his, he had all the signs of being a professor. I don't know that he was a professor. He just looked like a professor. He got up and he started to do Indian dance. And the look in his face was that of total astonishment. He obviously didn't know a thing about Indian dance. Another gentleman started to do incredible mudras, movements with his body, highly traditional symbolic movements. One girl started to do automatic breathing, the Bhastrika, except she did it so violently she was bouncing across the floor. And she was just the girlfriend of a guy that had come to the gathering. She didn't even want to be there. Right? What kind of insanity are we playing with? Those of you that have read Carlos Castaneda and understand the confusion and fear of the Western rational mind as it confronts these other planes of consciousness, these other levels of energy, these other natures of our own identity. And if you're not ready, and if you're too busy clinging to what you've got, you are going to be, put it in the simplest terms, freaked out of your skull. You're going to be frightened. You're going to be shaken by such an experience. If you recall, I've reported this a number of times, the article in the New York Times Sunday Magazine section about mysticism in America, in which it said 2/5 of the population of the United States, in excess of, 40 million people, had some kind of a mystical experience. This was a statistical sampling, interview sampling. Maybe through childbirth or through an accident or however. But of those 2/5, 85% said, it was the greatest experience of my life, but I never want to have another one. Right? Why not? Because it upsets the apple cart. Because they weren't ready for it. This is the experience that Dante says he will spend the rest of his life trying to describe. These are the experiences that William Blake was drawing and writing poetry about. It's the experiences that Aldous Huxley was dealing with. The experiences that Buddha was talking about. When Christ refers to his Father, he's not putting you on. Is that all in the realm of, well, it's relevant to somebody else, but not to me? Is your feeling of your own unworthiness so deep that you consider that something that will allow you to move way beyond what you have known is for somebody else who's better than you, but not for you? I mean, I couldn't be divine, could I? Could I be a being of light? Could I and my Father be one? Could I be the Ancient One? Could I be able to traverse in the realms beyond my mind, my intellect? Could I know what Buddha knew? Buddha looked back and saw his last 99,000 incarnations. Oh, I couldn't do that. I mean, not me. Not me. Why not? The bizarre predicament is that in every human being is all of it. That's what Buddha kept saying. He kept saying everybody's a Buddha. The only thing is nobody knows it. In you is every single thing you need to be a fully conscious, fully realized, fully free, fully enlightened being. Why would you want to be that? You grew up in this reality, physical plane reality, and you said, this is real. Your parents said this is real. And you always felt the edges of it. And at the edges, you felt fear and felt pressure. It's like having a checkerboard, and you can never go off the edge of the board. The game has to be played within the board. And at one end was birth, and the other end was death. And if you played the game wrong, you went insane, which was as good as going off the board. But then you know what came out? Some of you have seen it. Three-dimensional checkers. Came out with a clear plastic board. So you could play checkers this way and this way. Suddenly there were other checkerboards as well. For the first 50 or so times that I experimented with psychedelics back in the 60s with Tim Leary, I thought, just like Carl Jung thought in his book on dreams, myths, and whatever that is, I thought, well, that was interesting to go out there, but now I've come home to where it's good, where my family is and secure. But somewhere along the way in that experimentation, the other realities became as real as this reality. And I began to recognize that I had an identity in these other realities as well as I had an identity in this reality. And now and then I would meet a being over the years who would look at me, and I knew that he was not or she was not seeing who I thought myself to be. They were seeing another being in me that I couldn't see because I was too busy being who I thought I was. Gurdjieff talks about higher faculties. That is the natural course of the evolution of consciousness. That's what we're talking about, the evolution of consciousness. The only thing is, when we think of evolution, we think generally of things like Darwinian evolution. We think of evolution of mass stuff. But now think of the evolution of each individual consciousness. And that in each round of birth and death, the consciousness develops just a little bit more. And it's all directed. It's not random. Just for fun, let me repeat the image I've repeated so often of Buddhas as to how long we've been in the game. Remember the image Buddha describes? A mountain 1 mile by 1 mile by 1 mile. And every 100 years, a bird flies over it with a silk scarf in its beak and runs the scarf over the top of the mountain. The length of time it would take the scarf to wear away the mountain. Got that? A mile by a mile by a mile. One silk scarf every 100 years once. That's how long you've been doing this. Okay. Birth, death, birth, death, birth, death. Okay. Birth, 80 years, death. That's one. Right? It's a big mountain. And Buddha looked back and saw his last 99,000 of these. And that was only a drop in the bucket. So who are you? Are you so busy being identified with who you were born into? Is this reality so heavy, so real, so solid, that when you get to the edges of it, it grabs at you and pulls you back so hard that you say, I can't get out of it. It's too real. It's too real. I guess I'll just settle for being who I thought I was this round. Right? Sure, go ahead. I mean, there's a lot more to come. There's no rush. God doesn't have time. God doesn't care how fast you move. Only you care, not God. God lives beyond time. It's all just there. You'll get home. You know, it's a very relaxed parent. You know, kid wants to stay out till 2, let him stay out till 2. Get home tomorrow, get home tomorrow. It's okay. Sooner or later, it's where the food is. He'll come home. Now, there's no rush from above. I mean, all of the beings that have ever gotten free of attachment to a plane have all said the same thing. There's no time. Time is merely a structure, as is space, within certain planes of reality. That's what Einstein pointed out. But the way the evolutionary game, you know those salmon that swim upstream and they batter their bodies against rocks to get upstream to spawn? It's not because they're so horny. It's because it's built in. They just got to get there. That's the way evolution works. And once you've started to awaken, once you have started to recognize that you aren't who you thought you were right in the middle of a lifetime, I mean, it's not supposed to happen in the middle of a lifetime. It's supposed to happen at the end of a lifetime. See, you die. You say, goodbye, I don't want to go, save me, doctor, help me, and then you're dead. Okay? And then the next moment, a being says to you, hello, and you say, oh, I guess I didn't die, and the being says, no, you did die. And that blows your mind, or whatever it is you have at that point. Okay? And usually, most beings just hang out being mind blown until, like shell shock, until they get catapulted into the next round when they go into the illusion and forget again. Okay. But then when you get really high in the game, when you die, say goodbye, and then you die, and then somebody says hello, and you say hello. Say, that was an interesting round, far out. I accomplished a lot that time. And then you look around to see what's left to do, and you say hello to all the folks back at the farm, and you plan the next round. Okay? And then you say, okay, here goes. It might be a year or 500 years. You might go spend some time in a hell loca for a while, or Florida, or go to anywhere. Who knows? Hawaii, Europe, falling asleep, waking up. But they only wake up between births. Do you realize what happens to the game when somebody starts to wake up in the middle of a birth? I mean, it blows the cover. I mean, to sit there in a body and realize you aren't who it is you're supposed to be being. All right? Okay. And the nature of the evolutionary game is that when that happens, which is the point of how old you are in terms of how many times you've gone around, and that can happen in a birth at 1 year old, it can happen in the womb, it can happen in some ones that it happens in the womb, they say, oh, I dig how this is, I'm not going that trip. And we say they were stillborn, isn't that terrible? Or they were blue babies. They just wouldn't play. I mean, they wouldn't do what you're supposed to do. They wouldn't eat, and they wouldn't breathe, and they just said, I'm not staying. I mean, thanks, I've given you my blessing, I'm leaving. You know? Right. Some of those are the really high ones. But once in the middle of a birth, somewhere along in the birth, and it could be happening the moment before you die, it wouldn't matter. If you awaken, then the frustrating thing for most of us is that you can't go back to sleep. Okay? And you are a miserable mutant. Okay? You are caught neither fish nor fowl. You're neither a god nor a human being. You can't get up there, and you can't forget about up there and get back down. The image that most of you that have ever heard me do this business before, that's most easy to image, is if you have some favorite pastime. Like in the old days, it is no longer true, thank God, but it used to be eating pizza for me. Yeah. I mean, I like pizza, but it's not a thing with me anymore. But I would be sitting with a perfect hot, crispy pizza with cheese and green peppers and mushrooms and vegetarian, with gluten flour and all that sort of thing. And I would take the first bite, and I would just be desirous of becoming the super sensualist, the eater of pizza, the enjoyer, and see, it's not so hot that it burns the roof of your mouth, just perfect, just that moment, And there is a voice inside that's saying, eating pizza. And it's not judging me, and it's not putting me down, and it's not saying you ought to stop. It's nothing. It's just noticing eating pizza. It's that voice inside of you that, who are you? What are you doing in there? You aren't me. I'm a pizza eater. I am your deeper self. I'm in here too. You can't get rid of me. And in truth, you can't get rid of this being. And this being hangs out and hangs out and hangs out and slowly consumes all your other selves. And that's what the surrender is. It is finally a surrender into this higher self, which the Hindus refer to as the Atman. Christianity, it's referred to as the soul. It's a surrender of yourself to yourself. It's not a surrender to another guy or gal. It's a surrender to yourself. So you sit in the middle. You're still very much attached to worldly things. And at the same moment, you are being pulled by this inner voice, this inner sense that you are something other than you thought you were. The pull is the same pull that the moth feels towards the flame, that the salmon feels pulling upriver, going upstream. It is the pull that is the pull of evolution of consciousness, or the awakening of the spirit, depending on which way you want to talk about it. Evolution of consciousness is looking at it from down, looking up. Awakening of the spirit is looking at it from up, looking down. And you sit in the middle for a long, long time, sometimes birth, where each birth you keep awakening, and you sit caught in attachments to the world, and at the same moment struggling to get out. For many, many births. But each birth is just a delicate shade of more consciousness, a little less clinging, just a little less clinging. And what is a being who is called a free being? What is a free being? What is an enlightened being? What's a liberated being? It's a being who has become free of clinging. As the third patriarch of Zen says, to this or that. There's no clinging anymore. You're not clinging to this plane of existence, and you're not clinging to enlightenment. You're not clinging. First, you're clinging to getting high and avoiding coming down. Then as you evolve, you're not clinging to that. And when you're depressed, there's depression. And when you're elated, there's elation. There's a high, there's a low. And you're sitting behind all that stuff. Till finally you sit inside so deeply, so quietly, described as a vast ocean, a calm ocean, where mother and son become as one, where you are sitting right on the edge between form and the formless. You neither are nor are you not. And you are in form, and yet you are not in form. And you have a personality, yet it is not your personality. It's all of the paradoxes at that point. You live right in the midst of the paradox. But not clinging means that you do not cling to getting free of this plane either. There are many beings that say, look, I can't cut it in this world, I'm going to God. But God seems to take a dim view of that strategy. It turns out that you have to honor your incarnation in order to transcend it. If you push it away, it's the same thing as if you held on to it. It's like people who've given up smoking. If you're busy saying, I haven't smoked in 2 months, 3 hours, and 42 minutes, you're still a smoker. Like with Alcoholics Anonymous, in their philosophy, you're always an alcoholic who doesn't drink. You can never become not an alcoholic anymore. See, at first, you desired the middle class things. Certain kind of a car, certain kind of a home, certain kind of family, certain kind of job, certain kind of clothes, certain kind of insurance policies, etc., etc. Then you got busy seeing that something wasn't quite doing it right about that. Because the people that had that weren't making it in terms of their inner being. So you get busy rejecting it all. So you're not going to have a home. You're not going to have a car, and you're not going to have a hi-fi, and you're not going to have books, and you're not going to have an education, you're not going to have a bank account, you're not going to have insurance policy. And you're walking down the street thumbing one night, and you say, well, here I am. I'm somebody who doesn't have any of that. And that is just as much an attachment as if you had it all. And that was the whole history of rebellion and radicalism, was always reaction against, which was just attachment in the opposite direction. It was always the liberals and the conservatives and the this and the that, communism and capitalism. It was always forces against one another. But liberation isn't anti-anything. Liberation is much more, and that too. Sure, and that too. Of course, and that too. Tattvam asi, and that too. Yeah, right, and that one too. Like you could decide what was going to be your issue. Is your issue going to be pollution, ecology, medicine and health, and vitamins? Is your issue going to be beards? Is your issue going to be sexual freedom? Is your issue going to be new kinds of politics and more conscious politics? Is your issue going to be abortion? Is your issue going to be energy crisis? Is your issue going to be... But the issue of consciousness isn't exactly the same as those other issues. Because the issue of consciousness doesn't preclude anything else that I can figure out. I mean, Allen Ginsberg works on his consciousness, but he's still a poet. Jerry Rubin works on his consciousness, and he's still a political radical, sort of. Jerry Brown works on his consciousness, and he's a governor. Charles Lloyd. How many musicians work on their consciousness, and they're still musicians? People work in their consciousness, and they still make belts and sandals. People work in their consciousness, and they still have babies, or they have abortions, or they protest against pollution, or they drive cars that pollute. The work on one's consciousness isn't something you do instead of doing something else. You do everything you do, but you do it as a way of becoming more conscious. That's the difference in the game. I mean, I'm a lousy model in a way because I'm a professional consciousness person. Okay. I mean, this is the way I earn my living. Rapping on consciousness. But how many of those do you need? Yeah. It's not a coming profession. Maybe, but... And when you get finished pushing and pulling and grabbing and saying, I got to look holy. No, that isn't conscious enough. I can't drive a bus because that'll bring me down. No, I can't live in New York City. No, and all these miles. I can't eat that. I can't. Okay. You relax. And you say, well, I'll be as conscious as I am. The pendulum swings. And then an interesting thing happens. In that new kind of non-hysterical clinging to holiness, you begin to hear who it is you are in this incarnation. And you begin to understand the concept of dharma, meaning your route through, depending on your incarnation this time. I mean, I am bald, and it is of no use for me to read the lives of saints who have hair all over their head. Because I don't, nor will I. I might as well figure out how to be a bald saint. Now, the interesting thing about this evolutionary shift in consciousness or awareness of new levels is that the minute you touch what Gurdjieff called the higher faculty, the minute you go into what we call intuitive awareness, the minute you move beyond your rational mind, you are aware of more, you are quieter, you can stand back further, you can see more clearly, you are less caught, and as a result, everything you do in the worldly plane, you end up being able to do better. Now that is both a curse and a blessing. It is a curse in that most people meditate in order to become more effective in the world. That's the way TM sells it. Get your mantra, and you will be able to have a better job, a better car, a better hi-fi, just through 20 minutes a day. And it's true. That's what's so funny about it. And the army wants to meditate now? Everybody wants to get into the act now. CIA meditates. Everybody meditates. See? They want to be a better CIA. The Army wants to be a better Army. See? None of them want to become Arjuna, by the way. See? They just want to become a better Army. And the beautiful horror of that is that meditation was a vehicle, and that all methods of altering consciousness are a vehicle for allowing you not only to do better on this plane, but to start to realize your own divinity, your own existence on other planes, to start to contact higher consciousness, not Mars, higher consciousness. To start to know God, to put it simply. To even go beyond the concept of God. Go into God where God isn't, where the concept of God isn't. Because when you merge into God, you're in nirvana. Or nibbana, if you're a Southern Buddhist. To do what Christ suggested you do, to know the Father, not get hung up with the Son. That's all what's possible in this game. But the problem is, do you see what the guards are at the gates of this game? The guards that keep you from going into the inner temple are the increased power and success you get in the world as a result of any spiritual practices you do. Do you see what I'm talking about? I mean, you wanted sexual prowess, see? And you didn't get it. So you start to meditate. You say, well, since I'm not going to make it on this plane, I guess I'll go to God. And you start to meditate, and you get full of light. Light's pouring out of your third eye. And your body gets light, and the whole thing, and people start to come and saying, will you sleep with me? See? And suddenly, every fantasy you ever had that's been lying dormant there, okay, and how many lifetimes are you going to spend doing that now? Okay. Sorry, I don't have time. I'm going to God. Yeah. That's not me, you know. Okay. Those are the lions that protect the gates of the inner temple. And they're known as, in Hinduism, in Sanskrit, as the siddhis, or the powers. They are your own subtle desires. Because if you don't want anything, nothing bothers you along the way. People say, well, I started to open my consciousness, and suddenly there were these demons. And I got frightened. You know what you're frightened of? You're frightened of your own desires. Because the only thing demons play upon is stuff in you. If there isn't anything in you, they don't play. They look around and they say, not that one. That one doesn't want anything. Remember when the devil took Christ and said, hey, baby, you can make bread. Look, you can jump. Do it, you know. Come on, I'll show you. And Christ said, no, I don't want any of that stuff. I'm going to the Father. I want to go to God. And how many lifetimes, how many thousands of lifetimes do you spend playing where you awaken in the middle of a life, you start to go, you get a little, and then you settle? It's like playing roulette at Las Vegas. You put down so much bread, you put down $1, and it wins, and you get $2. And then you let the 2 ride, and you get 4. And you let the 4 ride, and you get 8. You let the 8 ride, you get 16. You let the 16 ride, you get 32. 32 ride, you get 64. Then it gets 128. 256. Okay. Getting up there. Could do a lot with $256. Okay. You want to go for broke? You want to break the bank, or do you want to take the $256? Well, I don't know. $256. I could do a lot with that. I mean, I'll tell you that in the past year, my life has been such intense struggle and training. My training starts every morning at 6 and goes until roughly 1:45 the next morning, and that's every day. And I am pushed, pulled, and badgered all the time. And I am let out about 3 days a week to go earn a living. Yeah? Mother. Why would I do that? I mean, I already can play Ram Dass for the next 30 years. It's a payable game. I mean, I wrote Be Here Now, supposedly. I can write more books, and that book was by the author of Be Here Now. I can just keep playing it for 30 years. If I want to take the $256, but the addiction of heroin is nothing like this. This is the orgasm with God I'm talking about. This is all of what the mystic poetry is about. This is merging with the Divine Mother. And yet the rules of the game are very simple and very fierce. If you push away this one to get there, you're going to get thrown back right on your face. And you've got to keep it together here, and you've got to keep it together there, and you can't be attached to here, and you can't be attached to there. Sometimes I go into states where my breath gets very thin, and I start to go into very high energy spaces, and I am floating up through golden plains with their Zeus and their Shiva, and up into white plains, and up into beyond and purple plains, and I'm going into these awesome beings, and my whole body is an ocean of bliss. And I suddenly feel this hand, this astral hand on my head saying, go down. And I am brutally brought right down to this plane. And then the person on this plane says, time to leave, go ahead, quick. And I got to find my body. This is my foot. And I got to get it to move and get out the door. And I got to get into my car. And because of the way my car was working, I had checked the oil before I could drive away. And there I am, somebody who was just practically with God, and I'm checking the oil. Right? Because if I don't check the oil, I won't have a car. And if I don't have a car, I'll have to spend all my consciousness getting a car. You got to keep it together. It's a ruthless game. It's not easy, by the way. It's ruthless. You keep it together here and there. If you get too busy with the oil in your car to forget to look up, well, there's another birth shot to hell. Shot to earth. Not bad. I mean, I don't mean to imply earth is hell. It's a sea of suffering, but it's beautiful. It's ecstasy. It's God made manifest in form. If the minute you take any plane and say, not that one, or I want that, or that one's better than that one, the minute, that's why they say, one to me is pleasure and pain. Imagine somebody being able to say a thing like that. What a far-out thing. I mean, I work with people that are dying a lot, and I don't know whether they're supposed to die or not. And there are some times when I'm with them, and because of the stuff that comes through, they get better. And sometimes the stuff comes through and they die. And I live in the world of thy will be done. Not my, but thy will. Because I'm not attached to whether people should live or die. I'm not even attached to whether I should live or die. That brings us to the term the Tao. The Tao, the Tao Te Ching, Tao, T-A-O, Tao. The way of it all, the harmony of it all. Learning to live your life in harmony on every plane. Live your life as a God being. Live your life as an earth being. Live your life as a biochemical being. Live your life as a psychological being. Live your life as a social being. Live your life as pure spirit. Live your life as a soul. All of it. Not clinging to this or that. And the reason you use all the practices of meditation, chanting, hatha yoga, and so on, is to loosen your hold on this plane, the physical, psychological planes, so that you can know of the other planes. Once you have known and tasted of them, it's not that those planes are better than this one, they're just different. And ultimately, you live with neither this nor that. You live in this plane and that plane, this plane and that plane. It is true that in some of these other planes, there is far more bliss than there is in this plane. There's far more ecstasy than there is in this plane. It's also far more horror than there is in this plane. Can you imagine being conscious with your third eye open so that you can look around on this physical plane and see all of the suffering in the universe all at once? Can you imagine how unbearable that is? Can you imagine being the holder of the knowledge as you look around and seeing all this suffering of people who aren't quite having it the way they need to have it, that it's all because they are caught in an illusion of their incarnation and they don't want to hear you tell them that? Imagine the horror of that. Talk about the unbearable suffering of the Buddha. The unbearable suffering of the Buddha. You have to be very strong in this game. Very, very strong. Nothing is held from your eyes. It doesn't all get beautiful. To look at the perfection of God on earth, which includes all of the suffering of the universe, and say, that's perfect? And simultaneously be an earthling who is working full-time to alleviate the suffering on earth. And live with that paradox day after day. That when a child is crying, you pick up the child and ease the child's crying at the same moment you knew that the crying was perfect and the easing of the crying is perfect. You ready for all that? The predicament is that as you alter your consciousness and get tuned to other planes of existence, this plane becomes just another one of them. It is beautiful, and it is sacred, and it is a part of God, but it's just another one. And the scary thing is that at that point, you may stay and you may not. There's no guarantees. And that's why the fear is real people face, the fear of God. Because your ego is very frightened. But to know, to be, Spirit made manifest. To have touched your soul, to realize your soul is part of God. to have gone up to that ocean that is beyond form, to have gotten strong enough to contain the energy of the mother, all the force that lies behind the forms of the universe, the pure Shakti, the pure Pran that lies behind form. To be able to give up the boundaries of your identity enough to merge into the white light and even beyond, to put your toe into the formless. And then, seeing as you see the entire universe, all of the Buddha fields, all of the worlds, and to see at that point the nature of form, the nature of the divine law, the nature of suffering, and to choose at that point not to merge finally, but to taste of God and to remain in form in order to relieve the suffering of all beings, in order to bring back from that ocean a little bit of the light, to light the way for others. When Christ said, "Let this cup pass from my hand," he was not asking to avoid the suffering. He was asking that he need not die at that moment so he could continue to suffer in order to bring the light down to this plane of existence. Sri Aurobindo attempted to do this. All the beings who have become free of the earth's atmosphere, free of the psychological and physical domain, free of their own intellects, who have soared into the realms of the gods, all of which I guarantee you are as real as you are, no more and no less. And that includes Shiva and Zeus and Ram and Lao Tzu and Buddha and Christ and Cochise and on, American Indians, all different beings who are as real at this moment as you are. They are just on a different frequency. And they have all chosen to stay in form, not necessarily form on the physical plane, often form on an astral plane, in order to be a transmitter of the light, to bring down the Shakti, to spiritualize the universe around them on the plane they exist on. And who is it that they offer that light, that spirit to? To those beings who in the course of their evolutionary journey are ready to look up. Buddha looked around every night through all the Buddha fields to see who was ready for enlightenment. Who was ready? Who was reaching? Who was saying, God, hear me? Who was saying, it's not like I thought it was? Who's meditating, saying, Christ, Christ, come now? Who's calling on Hanuman? Who's singing to Shiva? Not as a phony ritual, but with a faith that transcends the reality that they've known. Who's doing all that? Those are the ones on whom grace descends. For what is grace? Grace is the touch of those beings who were free to leave and elected not to do so. For they are not here because of their personal karma. They are here as perfect and pure instruments of God. They are the gurus, the saints. They live now or lived on this plane in the past and still live. Christ said, when you call me, I come. But who calls him in faith? Surrounding you, right by you, at any moment, are the highest beings who have stayed in form only to bring you to liberation. But what is required is that you ask, that you reach up and you say, me. Come on, God, listen, me. I want to go too. I want to know you. I want to know myself. Because what does it turn out? How bizarre. That when you keep going higher and clearer and higher and clearer and higher and clearer, who do you end up being? Ramana Maharshi said it very simply. God, Guru, and Self are the same thing. So who is it that turned out designing the game you think you're stuck in? You did. You designed it. Now you're playing it out. And slowly you will awaken out of it until you are free. And then you're free to continue to play or not. That is the true bodhisattva vow. And you stay in form not because you want anything, because everything you want is fulfilled by being with God. For that is the all and everything. It is the total fulfillment. It is the complete going home. It's the Om. Everything you ever wanted. That's what God was saying. He said it to Adam and Eve. If you get caught in your own mind and in seeing me as an object and pushing me away, you will go through hells until you awaken again to recognize that in the surrender to me, you are fulfilled. You work to get a new car, to have security and pleasure, and then it's all in time and it's passing and you grow old and you die. Because all of earth existence is in time and it is passing show. You're a great success and a moment later you're forgotten. Look on my works, ye mighty, said Ozymandias in despair. But nothing remains but that tablet. But in you is that which is beyond time. It has nothing to do with time. It has nothing to do with space. And once you have let go of the clinging to who you thought you were, you don't push it away, you just don't cling to it. You begin to recognize who you also are. And who you also are is all of it. The great Saint Ram Tirth said, I am without form, without limit. I am beyond space. I am beyond time. I am in everything. Everything is in me. I am the bliss of the universe. I am Sat Chit Ananda. Absolute existence, absolute knowledge, absolute bliss. Tattvam Asi, I am that. We were so busy looking down, we forgot God. Then we got so busy looking at God, we forget to look down. The final liberation is where you look up and you look down. You cling to neither this nor that. You are here now on every plane at every moment. That is perfection. That is what the being who you are is capable of. You are God, made manifest. Know yourself. This time, this birth, now. Not as labels, not I am God, but beyond labels. So that every moment of your earth existence is n-dimensional. It's everything in all directions. So you listen, but there is no listening. I speak, but there is no speaking. We sit in the silence behind form and play with God. And all the forms are our playthings, including our bodies. That is the joy that comes with the freedom. Once you know, from then on, there is only play with God. Nothing else. For all form is play. You've really been incredibly patient. See, here we are. Okay, enough of that. We will now take a break. Those of you that have had enough should leave. For those of you that are leaving now, let me just say, when you leave, don't work to remember anything that happened today. When you leave, smell the air, enjoy the ocean, look at the trees. God is all of it made manifest. Feel your steps, feel your lungs, look at the beings you love and feel your heart. Take joy in your incarnation. Blessings.